Okay, folks, so today it's a special one. Very lucky. I've been in contact with Pete Walker, the author of CPTSD from Surviving to Thriving, which is the major influence for the Fortress Mental Health Protection System project. And I particularly asked him about the healing of the superego, dealing with the inner critic. It's the same thing. He mentioned that in his book, there is an example of using anger to thought stop the critic in chapter 9 of that book. If you've not got it, I recommend you get it. If you haven't got it and you're not going to get it, don't worry, because I'm going to explain things to you now. But I do recommend that book. It's a good one. So here's what he said. There's two parts to his methodology. Part one, I intervene and psychoeducate them that this is the voice of the internalized child abuser, parent, teacher, bully, cleric, so on. I then say something like, you've been brainwashed into seeing yourself only in a negative light like they did. Your healthy instinct of self-protection has been driven into hibernation. And you can revive it by telling the critic, the proxy of your parents, cleric, teacher, whoever it was, to shut up. Or you can imagine your adult self going back to the past and using your anger to shut them up, like some loving relative or other adult should have. So it's like a form of restorative justice at the semi-conscious, unconscious levels that you're experiencing. You can do it quietly in your mind with force, or out loud with volume if you won't be disturbing anyone. Cursing at them and inviting rage into your words can gradually help you to separate and disidentify from needlessly abusing yourself, from being as mean to yourself as they were. You cannot do this too often. In the beginning, you may need to do this many times every day. That's part one. So I'm going to derive some techniques and some principles from this for you in part one and then in part two. But I'm going to describe part two to you here. In part two, Pete Walker writes, I shift into saying something that teaches them to shift from thought stopping the negative noticing of the critic and replacing it with positive noticing of the self. When you've sufficiently angered, you can then shift into positively noticing yourself by connecting with the hurt, he says to his clients. Innocent child, the hurt, innocent child that you were, and by expressing compassion, unconditional love, and care for them. That is what he would say to a client. He says, I help the client at this point to recognize and own their positive traits, accomplishments, and essential goodness, and to reflect them to their child. With enough practice, this process often invokes the client's tears of empathy for themselves and allows them to grieve out the fear and shame they were so unfairly burdened with. In any given therapy, he goes on to say, I may do a lot of this in the first year or two, until they start learning to instinctively feel pissed off when some minor imperfection spins them out into an excruciating flashback of self-attack, to express anger at those who installed their critic through constant negative noticing, when you're only ever being noticed by a parent or a bully or a cleric, for doing things wrong. In an especially effective session, there may be several vacillations between raging at the critic and crying for the defenseless kid that they were. In the beginning, I often model both processes and give them words to use in their self-protection, part one, and in their self-caring, part two. This is an example of the using anger to thought stop the critic section in chapter 9 of my CPTSD book, From Surviving to Thriving. That's by Pete Walker. I'll put a link in the more information thing below so you can get that. It's also an example of addressing the developmental trauma of CPTSD by healing the terrible developmental arrests of the core instincts of self-protection and self-compassion, which are the yin and yang of a healthy relationship with yourself. Okay, so this is the most up-to-date information on healing the superego. Do it in 2 parts, self-protection and self-care. This is Pete Walker's method. So part 1, we do self-protection. We're going to get all yang with it. So in this phase, you're using anger, a natural, primal emotion of righteous anger, righteous indignation, to resist. And you're going to train yourself internally to fight back against this part, which we're calling the inner critic, we're calling the toxified superego, the recordings, the negative recordings of bad parents, bad authority figures. So you're going to resist and you're going to fight back. By resisting and fighting back, what are you actually going to do? At the internal level, you can tell that voice inside of your head that's telling you that you're worthless to shut up. So you have the internal, so inside of your head, you actually say the words, shut up. So you're communicating internally. So part number 1 is speaking to part number 2 and saying, shut up. So that's just using words, or you can control your thoughts and you can imagine the adult self going back to the root incident, if you can remember it, and what you would say now to the people in that scenario. I wouldn't be saying much if it was me. I'd just give them a right hook. A right hook. That is, I'm only joking. I wouldn't really do that. Actually, I'm not sure that I wouldn't. If you actually put me in a time machine and put me back in some of those scenarios, I might do. So you can internally just be saying to that toxified superego, the inner critic, these old recordings, which are not you, shut up. Or you can imagine going back in time to where those recordings are coming from and dealing with it as you would as an adult. So here's a little complicated, it's a little bit complicated, a little bit nuanced, because it requires like recursive thought, which is the way your parents loved you is now the way you love yourself. So if it was transactional and conditional, up and down, inconsistent, that's the way that you have internal positive regard for yourself now. The way your parents protected you or didn't protect you is now the way that you protect yourself. So this effectively is good self-parenting, is what Mr. Walker is talking about here. And it means that though they didn't protect you, they attacked you, you're going to have to learn how to protect yourself without a father or mother figure in your childhood having done it. And it's arduous and it doesn't feel very natural, but it works, but it takes time. So the other thing that you can do is you can actually do something external. You could take an external symbolic action, which could be anything. Now, I've taught you for the emotional flashbacks that you can remember, use your fingers as a mnemonic, which some people have mocked me online for. They're saying, oh, he's saying that doing this reconnects your neural pathways. Well, it's not the finger pulling that does it. It's what you remember when you touch the fingers, and it's what you remember to do, and it's what you remember to say inside of your head. The process of thinking thoughts is only of speaking inside of your head, internal dialogue, and thinking about things, internal representations. That's thinking. The problem is with the thinking. The thinking has gotten not healthy and not helpful. So if we can alter the words and alter the pictures, then we're altering the thinking and we're dealing with at least part of the issue. It doesn't deal with the emotional side of it, but it deals with the cognitive side of it. So at an external level, if I had an internal critic kicking off, what could I do that would be a symbolic action at the external level? Well, I could externalize it to myself by either deliberately saying, okay, every time the inner critic comes up, I'm going to do this and say, get thee behind me, Satan. Or I'm going to make a little cross with your fingers, say, get thee behind me, Satan, if you find that amusing and helpful. Or you could actually load an anchor, preload an anchor and say, okay, when I do this mudra, when I touch my ring finger to my thumb, I'm going to remind myself that that part of me is external to me. The way I did that and the way that I originally taught people to do this was to actually imagine the toxic superego, the inner critic, as a golem, as a little golem-like creature, external from you and away from you. Why? Because, as Pete Walker says, you must learn, the objective here is to disidentify. The core of this is you disidentifying with the voice, that it's not you. So internally, you resist and fight back. And the unconscious then learns, okay, that means that this part that is talking and giving information, introjects, is not to be accepted as us. It's to be accepted as a parasite and that we're the host. So it's outside of us and it's attached to us. Oh, okay, that isn't us then. So when the voice, the more you disidentify and the more you fight back, the more you resist, the more you're protecting yourself as a parent and you're doing good self-parenting. If you externalize it, you could actually say, as Pete says, if it's not disturbing anybody, well, he said use anger, and I think he said curse. I have. That's how I would deal with it. I'm not going to do it on this channel because the rules of this channel are that I can't curse. But I have sworn like a drunken sailor when under attack from the inner critic, partly to offload the frustration, to express the anger, and also because I think it's funny. Using humor will help. If you find something to be funny, if you find it to be funny to go, get thee behind me, Satan, as long as nobody sees you, because they'll think you've lost the plot. But get thee behind me, Satan, could, if you're in the supermarket, could just be that. You could just tap your fingers together. It's a reminder so that you're not dealing with it internally all on your own. You've externalized it. And it sounds daft, but imagine you said, get thee behind me, Satan. I'm resisting this. Actually, get thee behind me, Satan's a good one, because in that mythology, Satan is the one who whispers bad things to you, the things that are not true. He's the deceiver. So even if you just accept it, you can accept it as a Christian, then that's easy. As a non-Christian, I can accept that as a useful piece of mythology. I want to block evil. I want to block evil suggestions. So I could say that, and if I tap my fingers together, it means I'm not dealing with it on my own. It means the moment I do this, when I'm on my, so I'm on my own in a supermarket and the inner critic is kicking off. If I do this when nobody's looking and I remind myself, or this, or whatever I've chosen, get thee behind me, Satan, and I have a little laugh, I'm not on my own now, because I've now connected to this YouTube video and the person who's delivering the YouTube video, and I've connected to Pete Walker inside of my mind, not the real life Pete Walker, but the internalized avatar of Pete Walker directly. And I'm not on my own for that period of time. So there's actually help there, which is really, really positive, because a lot of the feelings of despair and overwhelm come from the child. That's you, by the way. As an adult watching this, there's still a child inside of you feeling completely abandoned and completely alone. So you have a few weapons and a few comrades to bring to the fight, and suddenly the superego is running. It's turning on its heels and running away, and it starts to disappear, which it will over time. As he says, though, in this disidentifying process, at the moment it would be like there's you and then there's the inner critic, and you're struggling to disidentify between the two. So over time, the more you resist and the more you fight back, it won't just go away, but there'll be you. And then sometimes you'll see that there's an inner critic. There's not you, but sometimes, like when you're tired or whatever, you'll still be in this zone where you will be identifying with it. And that will go on for a period of time. You keep fighting internally. You keep fighting it externally. You keep using your anger to say, shut up, go away, whatever. And then eventually the end goal for disidentification is to move to this. This is me, this is that, and I am not that. That's really the crux of what we're trying to do here, is say, I am not that. The word that Pete used was psychoeducation. I never heard this term before reading the book CPTSD from Surviving to Thriving. And I went, psychoeducation, is that how you teach people to be a psycho? Well, it's not. It's your psychological education. But which psychology are you learning about? You're learning about psychology, but it's your psychology. It's your psychology that you have to learn about. Because if you're sat there, right, let me just talk to you about psychoeducation for a second and how this helps you disidentify. When you're sat there going, I'm mad, I'm moody, I go to the supermarket and a voice in my head tells me I'm a dreadful human being and I'm going to die alone in a bus shelter, a crack addict, I don't know, whatever your inner critic says. You're on your own with that. That's just who you are. When psychoeducation comes in and somebody says, no, actually, I think what you'll find is you have a condition and the condition is called complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I have it, he has it, she has it, loads of us have had it and we've recovered from it to varying degrees, or we're in recovery from it, whatever it is. That psychoeducation goes, oh, your map of reality expands. And as your map of reality expands, you realize you're not stuck on your own. You're not on your own. And that all of these terms and these things, these symbols in your head, me drawing that, helps your unconscious to go, oh, I'm not that. I'm separate to that. That's one part of it. You read the Pete Walker book and you go, oh, this is where these thoughts and feelings and behaviors are coming from. There's a source, I can understand it, and there's effective action I can take that leads me to the end goal, the specified objective of disidentifying from these poisonous terms, because I'm engaging now in self-parenting. We're actually really trying to rescue that hurt inner child part of ourselves. So this is the self-protection phase. There's a word I didn't write on the board there, and it's rage. It's rage. You will find yourself being angry, and that's okay. That's okay. It's a natural emotion of defense that somebody who is under attack should feel. It's primal, it's evolutionary, it's there to give you the capacity to do something with the fact that you're being interfered with and being invaded. So that's it. That's our self-protection phase. We want to disidentify, we want to use that anger. You must resist, you must fight back, you must say to it, hey, shut up you. What I found useful was, so this is me adding on my bit now, was as I was going through this process, was kind of like a dialectic, a Socratic interaction, where I would say, that's interesting. So apparently I'm a worthless piece of shit. And the inner critic goes, yeah, you're a maggot. And I go, that's... Have I always been worthless? Yeah. Oh, so I've never done anything good. Never done anything good. Yeah, that's right. And I could feel it shrink, not disappear, but shrink, like the certainty goes. And I would say, well, you're part of me. How is this useful? What do you think the inner critic said to that? When I turn around and I get my little philosophical hat on, and I say, how is it useful to tell me 24/7 that I'm a worthless piece of shit? What's the end goal here? Just clue me in so we're all on side, because you're a part of me. How is it useful to only ever have one message for me? What do you think the inner critic said? It said nothing, because it can't answer that question, because it's not even artificial intelligence, it's a recording. So it'd be like me saying to a tape recorder, why do you play that same song over and over again? It doesn't have an answer for me. It doesn't speak. It can only deliver one message repetitively. And when I realized that, and I started using that Socratic method of questioning, of being like, okay, that's an interesting point of view you have. Where do you derive, what's the evidence for that? And where does that come from? At a certain point in that line of questioning, sometimes it would stop, but you could feel a hesitancy and a shrinking of the force. And it would kind of just get quieter. You're still a piece of shit. But it's over on the other side of it. You still suck. You're still a maggot. And it's like, well, no, come back. I'm ready to hear you. But what are you saying? What's your fundamental communication? And what is the agenda here? And that really helped, because I was pointing out to this part of me, you only ever say one thing. And that can't be true all the time, because that's dogma. Nothing is always true. Nothing is always true. There isn't a person alive who's purely just a useless, worthless maggot. They must have done one thing. So I'd be like, well, tell me the one thing I've done that's good. Nothing ever. I'm like, come on, you know, and I know that can't be right. So there's that methodology as well that I applied to it, that I found useful as well. I love this. I think it's great. Really pleased that Pete Walker shared this with us, and he's given me permission to do this as well, which is really cool of him. So thank you, Mr. Walker. Tomorrow we'll be looking at the second part, which is self-care. So this is a necessary phase, but ultimately what we want to get to is we want to move past the fight, past raging against it, into having it function for us again. We don't want to get rid of the superego. We don't want to get rid of that part of us. It's supposed to be there. It's supposed to function and work with us and work for us. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and for your attention. If you like that, please give us a like and subscribe. Cheers.